I argue that startups, products really, are a vessel for value delivery. If your product can't deliver value and it can't do it quickly and then repeatedly, people aren't going to stick around.
Welcome to Talking Roadmaps, where we talk about everything roadmapping, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Today, I'm joined by Andy Budd. Andy, introduce yourself.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me on, Phil. So as you said, my name's Andy Budd, and I am a venture partner at Seedcamp for 2 days a week, which is a early stage sort of pre-seed, seed stage VC fund. And I am a advisor and coach to both designers and to founders for the other 2 days a week.
If you're enjoying the channel, subscribe, hit the bell, and give us a like. I know you're also an author, Andy, so just tell us a little bit about the book and what space that covers.
Prior to working in VC, I come from a design and product background. I used to run the UK's first UX agency for about 15 years. And so I have a kind of a strong kind of design and product background. When I moved into the VC world, I started having lots of conversations with early stage founders. And I started to realize that a lot of the problems they were having were the same problems I was used to dealing with as an agency person. And a lot of them were related to growth. And so I realized, particularly as a VC, if you are trying to move your product forward, often it's in order to show a certain level of traction to get the next round of funding. That round of funding then unlocks the opportunity to build even more product, to grow your team, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the problems, growth was at the heart of the conundrum. And some of it was kind of like, particularly early stage, people are on that route to kind of product market fit. And so some of them were market problems. Some of them were revolving around not having a big enough audience or having an audience that didn't really care, sales, marketing strategy. And some of them are around product. We have a product, but is it delivering value fast enough? Can we onboard people sufficiently? Can we retain them? And so I kind of discovered that there were sort of like 7 factors that had a really outsized impact on growth. In fact, pretty much every conversation I had could come back to one of these 7 factors. 5 of them were really positive that could help accelerate growth. And 2 of them were negative that would kind of slow growth down. And so I started formalizing this idea of like the growth equation, putting these 7 things into a little formula. And off the back of that, I started writing, and it started being an article, then a series of articles, and it ended up being a book. And so that's what the book is about. It's called The Growth Equation, and it's really about how startups, product teams, founders can navigate the first 2 or 3 years of their company pre-product market fit. So how can they get to product market fit, and how can they grow their business pre-product market fit?
And I'm sure that's going to bring in really interesting early stage growth kind of dimension to us talking about roadmaps here today. In fact, I wonder if any of those factors appear in our roadmap. Maybe you could tell us what those 7 factors are, and then we can kind of explore from there.
To start off with, this is not rocket science. These 7 factors are not some kind of magical, mystical, oh my God, I've never heard of these before. When I talk to you about them in a second, you'll go, well, duh, Andy, that's all obvious. But what I found is a lot of startups are trying to find the secret magic code that only they've ever heard of that will then unlock growth. And actually, a lot of it comes back to basics. It comes back to hygiene. So the first factor is audience. I meet so many founders that spend all their time building and haven't cultivated a big enough audience. And so, if you don't have a big audience, you don't have enough people coming and discovering your product, then you're not going to have enough people activating, retaining. And so the first thing is audience. However, it doesn't matter if you've got a big audience unless they're motivated, unless they have an understanding of the problem your product solves. And that problem hopefully is a kind of a painkiller type problem rather than a vitamin, something that kind of pushes them to your product and drives them through the product. So the second argument is motivation. How can you build and manage the motivation of people? And these 2 elements sort of are the market side of product market fit. The other sort of 5 elements are more the product side. And so I think one of the big things for me is value delivery. I argue that startups, products really, are a vessel for value delivery. If your product can't deliver value, and it can't do it quickly and then repeatedly, people aren't going to stick around. And so I think one of the main things that product people do is focus on the delivery of value. And actually, a lot of the issue around roadmaps is, are we delivering enough value? and what features or functions do we need to put in, what capabilities do we need to add that can deliver even more value. But there's a caveat with that, which I'll get onto maybe later in the conversation, but value delivery. And a lot of it is around speed of delivery. So actually it's value delivery over time. I meet so many startups that the value is there, but it's hidden. It's not obvious. And it takes users weeks and weeks and weeks to kind of discover that value. And if you can't kind of hit users in the face straight away with like, on the first run, on the second run, here is value, and keep delivering that value, they're never going to get into this sort of habituated place. And so the next argument is stickiness. Your product's natural innate ability to grab hold of people and keep them into the product. Obviously, if you have a product that starts to be kind of sticky, it retains people, then you also want to use it to acquire new people. And so the next one is the K factor, virality. You ideally, like everything around product-led growth is like, how do we create sticky products? How do we kind of build usage loops? And then how do we build acquisition loops? That's the virality. And so virality is hugely important. And so those are the 5 elements that have a positive effect. The 2 elements that have a negative effect are friction. This is classic design stuff. I see so many products that are difficult to use, that are lumpy, that are bumpy, that kind of put barriers in the way of accessing value. And so reducing the friction makes everything else work better. And adding more friction kind of like reduces your ability to grow. And then the last kind of major factor is a competition. What everybody else in the market is doing to the same stuff in the growth equation, but to kind of pinch your customers, to draw your customers away. The only thing I would say with competition or the market is that when I talk to founders about competition, they're always thinking direct competition. Like, oh, well, there's nobody on the market that has exactly the same feature set as me. We're special. Or like, oh, we've only, even though we've got hundreds of competitors, I only see these 3 or 4 people as competitors. For me, it's the whole competitive landscape. And for a lot of startups, your main competitor could just be a free spreadsheet. It could just be a free Google sheet that people have been using, and it's a bit lumpy, and it's a bit messy, and it's not very slick. But when they start using your product and things are difficult and challenging and the value isn't there, they just default back to the old way of doing things. And so those, in a sort of a nutshell, are the kind of the 7 arguments that make up the growth equation. That's chapter 1, by the way. So really, that is just an introduction to the kind of the challenges that people face with growth. The rest of the book is all around how do you do that? How do you decide whether you have a product-led, a sales-led, or a marketing-led approach to growth? How do you decide what good onboarding looks like, what good activation looks like, what retention looks like? How do you decide how you should price? How do you use behavioral science to kind of keep people there, keep people coming back for more? So really the book is like a guidebook of the first 2 or 3 years of a startup journey. But for your audience, like I pitch it towards startups, but really it's a product book. Like it's a product book in stealth. Like this is all the stuff that you as a product team want your founders to know. But if you sold them a product book, they wouldn't read it. They go, oh, I'll hand it to my product manager. So I see this as like all the core learnings that if your founder can really get and get excited about, this is the stuff that you and your product team will be delivering over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years plus.
Totally. I mean, I kind of take the position that the product manager is often, especially as a lot of organization scales, he's often the entrepreneur in the room because the founders are off doing the funding bit, and the entrepreneurial work of actually going and creating that value in the market and driving it and kind of taking it to market often ends up landing on the product people's shoulders. Like, I spotted you put out a 10 practical startup books list recently. It has my favorite product book ever on there. It has the Mom Test, which I remember getting from Rob himself at the Lean Conf back in 2012 up in Manchester, which was the first Lean Startup conference. And it was full of product people, me amongst them.
I mean, look, my honest hope is that I think if the growth equation could be anything like the Mom Test, if it could be anything like Obviously Awesome, like these are books that if someone says, I've got a branding problem, a positioning problem, or if I've got a kind of a customer discovery problem, you just say to your founder friends, take this book. My hope is the growth equation will be the equivalent in growth. I've got a problem with growth, a problem with acquisition. We're not growing fast enough. We'll go and grab Andy's book and that will help you solve that. So, but I think the value with all these books is they're aimed at startup founders, but they also teach product people about business, about the things that are really important, that are driving the mentality. And also particularly something like the mum test. Like the mum test is about design research, really. But you go and try and talk to a founder about design research, they're not going to listen. You talk to them about customer discovery, they might listen. But if you frame it in a language that they kind of get, they understand, like you are training them and teaching them about a skill which is important to you, but which if you sold it to them in your language, they might not have the time for or care about. So yeah, framing is massively important.
The framing of the book that I'm working on, which is very much pitched at product people, but should I be pitching it at the founders instead? I'm going to have to go and reflect on that a little bit more over the next few weeks. So okay, let's bring it really down to earth. And so we had those different aspects of the growth equation, and I very much, I had so much product stuff in there. I mean, some stuff that might now end up in a growth team as well, that sort of thing. It feels like some of that happened. You talked about the speed to value and that value creation. Well, a roadmap is, I would hope, a tool that helps us get to value and maybe communicate the ordering or the sequencing or possibly even the timing maybe of that value creation. How do you see that working in an early stage organization?
I'm conflicted with this answer. I know that your whole shtick is talking roadmaps, and I think roadmaps are really good to a certain level. But they can also be problematic. And so I think there's a level of granularity that I think is really useful here. When people think roadmaps, they often immediately jump to features. And features are important, don't get me wrong. Like, founders have this desire to add more capability to their product. And the capability comes in the form of features. Oh, our competitors allow you to do X. I need to do X on our platform. I wouldn't be cool if our platform allowed you to do Y. These sort of features are like the additional tools in a Swiss Army knife. Now, one of the problems is adding more and more features in a product. It becomes harder to use any single feature. And also, if these features are not holistic, it becomes more difficult to talk about the features. Now, Swiss Army knives have got a great shtick because they've kind of positioned it as a multi-tool. Most startups don't want to be positioned as a multi-tool. They want to have a really, really good framing and positioning. And so I think you can just keep throwing features on the roadmap and all of them make sense and all of them deliver great capabilities, but you can start to lose the kind of the vision and the journey and the shape of the product. So that's one thing to bear in mind. But the other thing, and this is going back to something you said a second ago, which is growth teams. Like, if all you have are feature teams building new capabilities, who is responsible for allowing the users who are currently using the platform to discover the capabilities you already have? And so what I tend to advise from really early stages is you have kind of two mindsets. You have a feature/capability team that are building new value into the product, but you have a growth team that are allowing the existing value to bubble up. And the things that you do on that existing value to bubble up, they can appear on a roadmap, but they're often the kind of things that don't sit on a roadmap very well, or they're often things that get sort of jumped over by new features and new capabilities. And so I kind of think you need to have a sort of a multi-stream mindset. If you've got to have the features because founders and executive teams are always going to add new capability. But if that's the only stream of work you have, a lot of the important value discovery work gets missed. And so this is why I think a feature team is a team that either sits off the main roadmap or have their own roadmap or really aren't even roadmap focused. They are outcomes focused. So you have a kind of a separate kind of like growth team that like, we're not shipping features. We're not shipping from a roadmap. We are tasked to deliver this area of growth. We need to improve acquisition by 3%. We need to speed onboarding by 20%. We need to increase daily active use by 30%. All of these things. And you are solving these problems, and in the process of solving these problems, you come up with hypotheses. And the hypotheses may be, well, let's try a tour. Let's improve our drip onboarding email campaign. Let's try and make sure that the value that we are delivering is front and center. Now, some of this might end up becoming a feature that an engineering team needs to build, but you are putting that kind of that sort of buffer in the way. So you're just not seeing things as feature. You're seeing things as problem solving, hypothesis driven stuff. And so I think having these two teams, one that is feature roadmap driven, one that is problem solving, to access existing value, I think is a really, really useful model.
Interesting, because I would argue that feature team should still be working to a roadmap full of problems to solve and needles to move and minimizing the features on there.
Yeah, no. But this is the point here. You're absolutely right, but it doesn't happen. And I don't think you can change that overnight. And so what I'm suggesting is you have a small little side team that have the ability to maneuver in a way that doesn't destroy the leadership's desire to have a roadmap that they are controlling and they are shipping. Like if you are working in a feature factory, you are not overnight going to say, hey, we're going to move to a different model. But what you can do is you can carve out a smaller number of people and say this smaller number of people have got a specific remit where they can work in that way. Now, ideally, this becomes a strategy because ideally that small little value extraction team get better and better and better. And you start see them moving the needle, and then the leadership team go, well, why are this team doing so well and that team aren't? It's like, well, because that team is outcome focused rather than output focused. And slowly you can build that culture, but I don't think you can do it overnight. I've never seen anyone that have been able to kind of say to a whole bunch of founders, stop giving me features and start giving me problems.
Yeah, it's the perpetual challenge. And yes, often you have to disagree and commit and ship some of those features at the very minimum to build the trust that, one, you can ship. Once you can ship, you can start to work on, you've got the trust to ship. You can start to work on the trust of, now I can start to actually maybe bring things to the table that are from that broad problem space. But yeah, it is a perpetual challenge, and I can see that almost Trojan horse strategy working quite well of, well, put this small team over here that can show what good looks like.
And also, arguably, it's a military strategy. I mean, again, I hate using military analogies, but a lot of leaders kind of like them. You know, that kind of small independent team are like a Navy SEAL team. With a Navy SEAL team, you don't tell them what to do. You give them the problem, you create a model of the space, and you let them solve that problem. But you still have the infantry, you still have the tank division, you still have the major battle units that are being directed by the leadership, and the leadership need to do that. But having a separate team of people that can work independently allows you to have this kind of two-tier system. And so I think the best approach is to have, like I say, people shipping value, people solving problems. And I think the feedback and the frustration a lot of product teams get is they only want to do one in a world where both of those are necessary. And actually the bigger team are the infantry, they're on the ground kind of troops team. And so, yeah, I think it's just a pragmatic approach to a philosophical kind of challenge that we all have.
Although I'm slightly disappointed. We're both British. We're talking about the Navy SEALs, not the SAS. But, you know, we may have a roadmap there. And I think you kind of started alluding to a purpose, and that purpose being around focusing on delivering value, but maybe being a little more feature-oriented versus when we're working on the problem and growth-oriented stuff. It might be moving too fast for a roadmap. Would that be a fair assessment of what you were trying to say there?
Not so much. I mean, there is an element of speed, but there is also an element of kind of shape. I mean, I don't know, you probably are aware of the Carnot model. And the Carnot model, it has sort of, you know, the kind of the core kind of performance-driven improvements, but it also has these delighters, these small little things that can actually have an outsized impact. Now, these delighters are kind of things that designers will often petition for. Like, we want to have a beautiful button animation. We want to have a lovely, you know, audio interactive element. We want to have a really, really smooth onboarding flow. Like, these are the kind of the things, the chocolates in the pillow, the handwritten note, the hotel cleaner leaves on your bed around what the weather's going to be like the next day. Like, these are all things that can have a massive effect on experience, that can actually make your stay in a hotel to be a wonderful stay. However, if you are going down a list of features in a roadmap, and you're doing a Moscow kind of, you know, or you're doing any kind of prioritization process, these are the things that are not going to be at the top of the list. You know, again, founders, engineers, product managers are often going to be pushing for new capabilities. And so I guess what I'm suggesting is that you need to have a multi-tier like betting strategy. Whereas, you have a certain part of your time allocated to the delivery of these obvious new capability features. But you also have a certain amount of time carved out for things that would not make the grade in a traditional roadmap when you're looking at kind of like, our bet on the impact and all these kind of things, but which are, harder to measure. But which actually deliver a huge amount of value. Like, if you are a founder and you're trying to decide, well, should we improve our email drip campaign for onboarding, or should we add this brand new feature? If it's an either or, you're going to say, well, we're going to need to add this on new feature because one of the people that our sales team talked to wanted this and our competitors, blah, 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 blah. And so all of these smaller things start taking a back seat. But you need the resource to do that, because it doesn't matter if you've got all these new features if people aren't discovering, if they're not getting on board, if they're not activating. And so it really is around dividing your attention and your resources in a way that isn't just one dimensional. And so, we can do our kind of clever sorting method on our roadmap, but we should also have a separate team that has a little bit more flexibility, that can do things a little bit differently.
I'd advocate, I absolutely agree with you. I'm not necessarily convinced about the separate team, but then I'm used to a product managers zooming up and down and looking at those different layers. Like I remember when I started product, making those commercial decisions, like maybe improving a drip campaign, was classically what I would get involved in. And I would make a marketing choice over adding a feature as many times as I chose a feature over something else, because success of the products, not about adding features. But I think that craft has changed a little bit in the last 15 years.
Here's why I would advocate, again, because I think you've got to decide why you're making a decision. As a product manager, for your quality of life, for your fun, of course you want to do it all. You want to do the big 6-month, version 2, knock it out of the park features, and you want to do the fun, small, little iterative things that are going to potentially make an interesting change. You want to do it all. But that's sort of kind of selfish. And also, I think if you're in a small company, you can kind of do a little bit of everything. But first off, we have a problem, like you said, of going up and down the stack. Context switching is really difficult. Context switching is a killer of productivity. If I'm having to think really big one day and really small the next, or really big in one meeting, really small the next, we lose a level of performance. And so you want to have different people, I think, looking at different levels of scale on your product. I know plenty of designers and plenty of product managers who are really good at leaning heavily into the lifestyle, the problem space of their customers, that bathe in customer discovery, that are really good at understanding where the product needs to be in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, of building that vision. That's a thing they're really, really good at. They love to do. But they might not be the best people of doing A/B testing. They might be not the best people of writing micro copy. They might not be the best people of putting something out that's really, really scrappy and messy, because they are perfectionists. And so I think you need to have different teams that work at different scales. This is also why, going back to the example, like the Navy SEAL team versus the armored military division. Like that armored military division, you get them moving and they're really good at doing that. They're really good at shifting resources and moving a certain way. But they're not designed and they're not staffed with people who are small and flexible. And so I think we want to be able to do it all. But I think that hubris and ego prevents us. I don't know too many people that are great at thinking big picture and also can roll up their arms and get into the day-to-day analytics. I don't know that many people, engineering teams, who can make high-performant, high-quality code that can deal with billions of concurrent hits, and also at the same time knock something up really, really quickly and messy to get it out, to test it, and be willing to not push it through the same level of engineering rigor, because that is not what they're trained to do. So you need that high quality, future-focused team that are around performance and quality and deep thinking, and you need the scrappy, messy, early stage kind of mindset. And you might be lucky and you might be able to find that in a single team. That's very rare. And this is why we have, different layers in the product stack. This is why we have separate growth teams. This is why most product teams don't have copywriters and marketers and SEO people and multivariate testing and all that kind of stuff on your team. And so what you tend to find is you tend to slowly build out different teams that have got different skills and capabilities that are looking at different parts of the journey. And like I say, it's spread betting. It's a difference. It's a difference between I'm sorry, this is maybe a little bit too much of an analogy, but like if you are running a retirement fund for, let's say, postal workers in Canada, you want 90% of your portfolio to be safe as houses. It will be in gold, it will be in gilt, it will be in the S&P 500. You'll put it somewhere safe. You might want 5 or 10% of that as in VC, in high risk, high reward investments. This is exactly the same mentality. You as a product leader, you as a VP of product, a CPO, you need to take an investment portfolio strategy. You need to be with different teams, different levels of risk, different levels of speed, so that you have the right people in the right seats. And so, yeah, that's my view there.
I mean, I'm very much hearing a McKinsey Three Horizons essentially overlay there. Like that typically puts into 3 levels of kind of your growth, your core business, and your genuine new business areas. And that's 10, 20, and 70%, for example, of that spread betting.
I mean, you kind of invoked the kind of the devil of McKinsey. I need to kind of cross myself for something here to banish the spirits. Like that is not the way I would necessarily put it. So I think so this is the key, because I think it's really easy to see this in one-dimensional thinking. Like I believe in now, next, and future thinking, which is probably similar to the McKinsey kind of like 3, what do they call it? The 3 horizons. I think it's useful as any leader to be thinking about what are we doing now and, over the next 6 weeks? What are we doing in the next 3 months? What are we doing in the next 2 or 3 years? And so horizons are one way of slicing things. But you can be, if you're running in a sprint mode where you're doing 2-week sprints, you can be delivering features in that model. What are the features we're delivering now? What are the features we're delivering next? What are the features we're delivering in the future? But you can also be thinking around separately, we've already got all these features, we're not delivering new capacity. What can we do to help our users get that capacity out? And so I don't think it's as clear cut as like, a time frame. I think it's a mode of thinking. I think it's around, like I said, delivering new capabilities, extracting, allowing people to find the existing capabilities easier.
Yeah, but I think I've just spotted a possibly an interpretation of the 3 horizons that is not necessarily always the way of looking at it. So you've taken those 3 horizons as time horizons. It's actually about focus. So one is about growth. It's kind of about growing optimizing your core business so that as you call it, growth. Another one is what they call growth, but it's actually about where do we add. It's the areas where we're winning new business. So kind of that could be the adding the new features. We can be working on these concurrently and paying off concurrently. With the speed of business today, the stuff in Horizon 3, the genuine new business, often has a habit of paying off even faster than the core business stuff, because we're slowed down by tech debts and things like that, whereas doing something new and scrappy so often can pay off even faster. So we can be working on them all right now, but there's maybe some payoff timelines that vary.
But that's the point I'm talking about. If you're adding new capabilities, the timeline payoff will be in the future necessarily, whereas you're allowing people to access the existing capabilities better. The value delivery is a little bit nearer. But again, I do think when you look at the McKinsey stuff, it is usually considering a series of S curves, and you're looking at the current growth curve we're on at the moment is going to be leveling out. What is the next trend we need to be surfing? What is the trend after that? And so I think it is a really useful planning tool, but I don't want to get mixed up with this idea of value delivery, value extraction. And look, it might be a model that works for me. It might be a model that works for some of your other listeners. It might not be a model that kind of works for you. But like I say, I want to have product leaders thinking more around spread betting and having different teams working on different types of problem, some of them delivering features, some of them solving problems, than having a one-size-fits-all mentality. And that, I guess that's sort of ultimately what I'm trying to get at.
I mean, I love the clarification there of value delivering and value extraction. I think really brings it all home to what you were just talking about there. So yeah, I love it. How do we get our teams aligned on those different threads of work? How do we communicate and align the direction of travel for those different threads of work?
I mean, it shouldn't be difficult. I mean, I think the first thing is that, you have team structures. You have, this team is focused on solving these kind of problems for these kind of users. We're delivering value. We're delivering new capabilities. When you're going off and doing discovery work, you're trying to figure out what our product doesn't do that it should do in the future. What is the most useful thing that we can be building next in order to deliver new value, yada, 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 competitive analysis, like all these kind of things. And the team is focused on the vision of the product. It is more of a vision-driven thing, like where are we heading? A roadmap is basically a flag in the sand that says, this is where we're heading, this is where the product is heading. And you hire the right kind of people around that. You hire people who are user-centered. You hire people who are wanting to solve the bigger problem of, helping the users solve their problem, and the features and functions that allow them to do that. And, it's messaging from the leadership team. Each team has its remit. Each team is trying to solve a particular kind of problem for users, deliver that kind of value, yada, yada, yada. And then you hire a separate group of people who I'd like to say, like the growth team. And their job isn't to create new value. Their job is to allow that value extraction easier. And so their job is like, these are the 3 or 4 metrics that we're optimizing for. We are optimizing for speed of onboarding, delivery of value over time. We are, this is our North Star metric, or this is a metric we're optimizing for. And we are not giving you a roadmap to ship from. We are giving you the autonomy to decide what do you need to do in weekly sprints in order to iterate towards that goal. And so you need much more independent thinkers. You need much more, experimental thinkers. You have a hypothesis, driven approach to these things. And so it's just assembling the right people on the right team. But like I say, you're inoculating that smaller growth team from the bigger drumbeat of the feature factory, because they're taken out of that loop of the feature factory and they're focused on, bringing all of those key growth elements down. So it really is just kind of like each team has the right messaging, each team has the right leadership, each team has the right manifesto or remit. It's a pretty straightforward thing to do, really. It's just kind of basic management skills, I'd say.
I wish basic management skills were more commonplace then. Just like common sense is uncommon sense in most places.
But like I say, I guess what I'm saying is like there's a structural element to it, but within an organization, you have different structures that support different behaviors, and you have leaders of each team that are given a remit around how their team operates and why it might be different from another team. And then you're just really clear, in the same way as as I said, like you're managing an infantry division, you'd manage it differently from how you would manage a Navy SEAL or an SAS team, and you just have to realize that you need a different mix of skills, and each one of those skills has a different remit, and the kind of work that the SAS team has to do is very different from the kind of work that the Air Force or the infantry or whatever has to do. So it's not a difficult thing. I mean, most of the big tech companies have a growth team and have effectively a feature delivery team. If you look at Netflix have a massive growth team, and that growth team is a mix of product managers and engineers and designers, but their remit is focused on growth. It's not focused on feature delivery. And there's a little bit of gray area because some of the stuff that happens in growth might end up being a feature and vice versa. And there's always going to be a border that gets contested. But here's the other thing to move us off of this, because I think we maybe got bogged down a little bit in a particular kind of thread. But the other reason why I think this thinking is important, I often think in sort of growing sort of companies, there becomes a point where there's a battle between product and marketing. It can also happen between product and sales, but it's less so. I think product and marketing is often a really, really challenging dividing line, because if you're a product person, your understanding is that you own the whole of the product experience. And that product experience arguably starts from the marketing website, the .com, the main domain name, and then it goes through onboarding, activation, all the way through the life cycle to, kind of unsubscribing. And I think most product managers see that, like, we own this space. And a lot of the time, product managers see marketing as everything that happens before people coming into the product. And so there's social media marketing and there's, above the line advertising, yada, yada, yada. However, increasingly, a lot of marketers see themselves as product marketers. They see themselves as, we're not just driving people to the site, but we are owning the content on the site. And actually, we're owning the onboarding process. We're owning the activation process. And actually, once you're activated, we're owning the messaging. And also, we're owning the email kind of onboarding flow that kind of tells you what you're doing. And also, hey, you're thinking of unsubscribing. We're going to own parts of the unsubscribing flow because we own the messaging, and we're going to offer you an offer that kind of removes that desire. So it suddenly gets really messy. And then what happens is there's a power struggle, the CMO versus a CPO. And in some organizations, particularly tech companies, the CPO wins because that is the model in tech companies. In more traditional companies, the CMO wins. And in many, many companies, a truce happens in this kind of like weird kind of borderland space, which can be really, really problematic. One of the reasons this happens often is because as product people, we work in a very different schedule. Like, we work from a roadmap that might have been planned 6 months ahead. And then marketing comes and says, hey, Phil, look, this is really important. We've got an event happening 2 weeks' time, and we really need you to bump this thing up to the top of your list. And you're like, well, we can't do that because it's going to mess up our entire program. But you do it because you want to be a good person. And then next week, the same thing happens. And next week, the same thing happens. Marketing people work at a fundamentally different pace. They're thinking often 2 weeks ahead, not 2 years ahead. And often they don't have resource. And so they're relying on your resource. That starts to get really, really stressy. And so then marketing start delivering their own resource. And they start arguing, well, we'll own the website. And we'll actually, we'll have our own marketers and our own designers and yada, yada, yada. And so this battle for control gets really, really problematic. And one of the best ways I've seen to solve that is you put a third team in there. And that third team is the growth team. And that growth team arguably sits in the middle of product and marketing. And it seconds people from both. So you will have in that growth team, you will have a bunch of product teams with engineers, front end, back end, product managers, yada, yada, yada. But you will also have some marketers, some copywriters, some marketing designers. And that growth team has a remit which is separate from marketing, separate from acquisition, and separate from value delivery that kind of sits in that middle and grows and grows and grows and becomes its own thing. And so that is the emergence of the process that I see a lot of companies go down. If they can't solve that battle between product and marketing, they build this separate team that kind of harmoniously sort of interweaves the two.
It's interesting because I consider that interweaving to be product management's entire raison d'etre.
And marketers will say exactly the same. If you go to any marketing course, marketers will tell you about the 3 Ps or the 4 Ps or the 5 Ps. Marketers will tell you, as a marketer, my job is product. My job is positioning. My job is pricing.
Well, I consider product management to be marketers. That's maybe where it comes in. People miss, if you look at what product managers really do or should be doing, it's strategic marketing. Just basically nobody does strategic marketing anymore. They get taught at university and then it disappears in the marketing domain.
But you're right. And this is why I think this intermingling is important, because a lot of the really, really best product managers do stuff that could be confused with marketing. A lot of the really best marketers do stuff that could be confused with product management. And unless you have that kind of like DMZ, that kind of safe zone in the middle, which is growth, where both of those groups can live harmoniously with their skills that overlap, but aren't impacting the bits that they don't overlap, then you have a really nice balance. If you don't have that space in the middle of growth, then it becomes a power play where either the VP has a best relationship with the CEO and the investors, or the CMO has the best relationship with the investors. Or maybe the CMO worked at Amazon and they've got more power. Or maybe the CPO actually used to work at Airbnb, and it becomes a horrible, horrible mess. And you can't solve this through power plays alone. And so it has to be a structural solution. And I think the best structural solution I've seen is the creation of growth teams that sit in the middle of both of those and create a third buffer zone where you can actually have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, you see, I guess I've seen a different model that I quite like, where essentially, I think of it as there are two teams. There's a product team, i.e. the product development and design team, with product management sitting in that team, and product management sitting with a bridge into then what I call a go-to-market team, where I actually think of the product marketer as almost the broad equivalent in go-to-market as the designer is on development. And so that ultimately there's different ways of solving it, and it will work way better in different places. But I agree. There's a need to find a bridge that means that people don't step on each other's toes so much.
And I think some of this is kind of like naming conventions. I mean, I think early stages of a startup, go-to-market team, makes sense. I think in the early stages of a startup, go-to-market team makes sense. But if you're a 10-year-old company, you've already gone to market. It kind of doesn't make sense anymore. Like, you are not going to market now, you are in the market. And so I think the growth team is not discipline focused, it's outcome focused. What is our remit? Our remit is growth. What is our remit? Our remit is delivering features. Or functionality? What is our remit? Our remit is driving users to consider our product. And so, but yeah, I think it is largely kind of language, but I prefer the framing of growth. But like I say, I think there's a battle, and I think all the product managers I know are well within their rights to say we should own this. But ironically, all of the marketers I know that are good are also well within their rights. And if we don't address the core overlap, then we've got problems.
Well, it's quite interesting the timing that you talked about, because maybe it's because I have a B2B skew in my history, but the marketers usually were working on the much longer timelines than even the product people. And so we found that actually we'd have a demand a year's time that we had to meet, because they were playing towards CES or MWC or whatever it was. And so those were fixed dates. We'd still fight because we didn't want to be given a constraint of a date, although I'm actually quite a believer that if there's an externally driven date, you work to it, right? You can't change the world, well, not without delivering anything anyway.
But I think this is the thing, though. Like, I don't know if you're aware of the sort of the Stuart Brand concept of shearing layers. Within an organization, there are different areas that are working at different kind of speeds. And I think you're right. In a small early stage startup, which is where I mostly am, there's no point thinking about what will be happening next year, because you might not even be in existence next year. And so I think marketing in an early stage startup is very opportunistic. But I would also say that in a very large company, there is going to be a team of people in the marketing team that are very opportunistic as well. A new story breaks, a competitor goes under, a crisis happens, and they will want to very, very quickly get ahead of that and utilize that. A Google indexing changes, something happens with, pay-per-click. There are always these sort of shocks that need to be dealt with really, really quickly. And these shocks can completely destabilize a beautifully well planned out kind of roadmap. And, if you are as a product team, driving towards a particular launch date on a thing, and the marketing team says, hey, look, we need to do this thing right away. We've got an offer, for our CEO to go onto Forbes, and we need, and he said that, or she said that we're going to deliver this sort of feature and we need to kind of deliver it, then you need to bump it up. But you're absolutely right. In larger companies, these marketing plans can also be many, many years in the making. And so, the point being that different teams work at different speeds, and when those shearing layers interact, they cause friction. And you've got to be aware of those areas of friction, and you can't be precious around it, and you can't be protective. You've got to figure out ways in which you can manage that natural friction. And you can't just go, well, look, we've got our roadmap, and we're not going to kind of deliver on what you're asking, because that's going to mess up our plan and our KPIs and our OKRs. This is a different thing. Like, OKRs are great, but if you've got a silo team over here that are working to a set of OKRs, and someone from marketing says, well, we need to do X, and it doesn't match their OKRs, then you get that kind of friction. So it's complicated.
Yeah, I think we could conclude that about everything in business, life, and definitely product. We've lightly touched on road mapping, I think, Andy, but I think I'm going to pull us back to, I guess, my core question I always like to kind of finish with. If you had to distill your philosophy on road mapping into one or two sentences, and maybe we can put a growth overlay onto that, what would it be?
I mean, again, I think road mapping is too blunt a tool for me to answer that question. And you probably see it as this beautifully nuanced thing, but road mapping is basically a sequencing of activities, hopefully in order to drive towards some kind of vision of an outcome. But it's arguably a delivery mechanism, and there are multiple ways of doing a delivery mechanism. I guess the point I'm making is, how do you decide what to deliver and when? And so the way I look at it is much more through the lenses of the acquisition funnel, pirate metrics, and it's much more through the lens of kind of loops and funnels, and much more through the lens of growth. And so however you decide to do your roadmap, however you decide to divide up your work and give it to different teams, I think you need to structure the teams differently. And I think you need to have different levels of fidelity to give to different teams. And so I don't think a one-size roadmap fits all. I do think of it like a portfolio, an investment portfolio. And, I think you can have a single, one team or 5 or 10 teams that are delivering functionality from a core roadmap. And I think you can have 3 or 4 teams that are delivering from a different plan, a different format, et cetera. But really, it's all around coordinating where is the best place, where is the right place to put effort. And why are you putting effort? You're putting effort to grow. You're putting effort to beat the competition. You're putting an effort to make sure you secure that next round of funding, because you want to have lots of amazing jobs. You want to have lots of, happy customers. You want to have lots of happy staff members. And so, like, in a weird kind of way, I see the roadmap itself as a means to an end, not an end in itself. And it's a handy MacGuffin for managing more challenging questions around value and resource allocation. And I think if you use roadmaps in a two-dimensional way, you miss out a whole bunch of nuance, which I think is really important. If my whole investment portfolio was, okay, my investment portfolio is which stocks that are traded on the indexes should I buy, then you're only limiting yourself to kind of a certain class of investment. If you are looking at solving problems, and so arguably maybe the thing that I think is really problematic is people jumping too quickly from problem to solution. And I think what a roadmap is a store of perceived solutions. We're going to do this, 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 and this. And what happens is you put it on the roadmap and then you forget it. You kind of expect somebody else to deliver it, and you've already decided this solution is going to work. And so you're probably not going to look back and check it. And even if you do, you've shipped it, it's gone out, it's in the roadmap for 6 months, it gets delivered, you've moved on. And so there's very little learning opportunity once something's gone on a roadmap. And also it often gets untethered from the person that initiated it and the problem it solved. I'm much more interested in having a store of problems. Forget the roadmaps. I want an organization to have a backlog of problems, a problem backlog rather than a roadmap. And every quarter, the leadership team look at that problem backlog and go, what are the major problems that we need to solve? And then come up with a bunch of hypotheses about how we might want to solve these. And, again, a roadmap item is usually one of a number of hypotheses. But again, it gets decoupled from all the other hypotheses. And the only way to keep all those hypotheses together is by coupling them with a problem, a problem store. So, and this isn't just with kind of product delivery. This is also with how you run your business. However you run the business, you're going to have a bunch of problems. You're going to have problems around the inefficiency of certain divisions. You're going to have problems around performance of team members. You're going to have problems around all kinds of things. Like, if you just immediately jump to the solution, then it might be the wrong thing. And so, a constant store of problems. And every quarter, have we solved that problem? No. What did we try? We tried this, that, and the other. Did it work? No, it didn't work. Okay. What are the other hypotheses we can test? Bang, bang, bang. And you only remove that problem from your problem backlog once it gets solved. And so, I think you have this sort of dual thing, a list of problems, your hypotheses of how you're going to solve them. And the hypotheses how you're going to solve them are the roadmap. But it's not set in stone. It's not, well, we delivered this and everything's fine. You need to constantly keep bringing it back to that core problem.
I think I broadly agree. I mean, frankly, my roadmaps are covered in problems, not in even the solutions, until I get really close term these days. That's also not something every organization is mature enough to deal.
But it's also because I think the model of a roadmap, it is not, I think it's too linear. And I think you're right to try and fill your roadmap with problems, not solutions. But that's not, like a to-do list is a list of things to do. It's not a series of problems that you're constantly looking at. It's a series of things you check off. And I think most roadmaps become a series of things you check off. And even if you try and hack it to stop people from checking them off, there's a desire to check them off. And so you need to have something else that isn't a series of things you check off in a to-do list sort of mental model. And so I think, it's a nuanced thing. It's a philosophical thing. But I just think there is a different class of problem or space that you hold these things that is separate from a roadmap, that is mapped to this roadmap and constantly mapped back and forth. And the ironic thing is, I think actually most product managers are that thing, and what they have is they have a whole bunch of problems in their mind. They're constantly doing that manually, but it's invisible because it's in your head. And people are constantly annoyed with you because, why are you asking this? We just need to ship this thing. And so I think weirdly, product managers are filling in the gap because we are not effectively managing problems well, and we are hanging them on, giving them to you, that you then try and shove them down this little pipe that we call a roadmap that isn't quite fit for the job.
An interesting place to leave it, Andy. So it's been a pleasure having you here, and I love conversations like this because they're challenging some preconceptions, and the channel might be called Talking Roadmaps, but I'm actually completely happy to throw away roadmaps the day we can get all of our teams aligned and going in the same direction and delivering value consistently. It's just a tool in that space that helps us do that. So I always like to end, Andy, with just an opportunity for you to pitch yourself, pitch your services, how people can find you, how you can help them.
Well, like I said, I do a few things. I'm a VC. If you're running a European-based early stage pre-seed to seed startup and you want to get funding, come and drop me a line. I'm just Andy at andybud.com. I work for a company called Seedcamp, and always loving to talk to early stage founders. I also do private advisory work. So if you're a founder or a design or product leader that is having challenges with some of this stuff, then also reach out. But the main thing I'd say is go buy the book. If you go to andybud.com/book, or you just go to Amazon, The Growth Equation, it's a book that I think product leaders will get a lot of value out of, but also it's one of those books that maybe you give to your founder if you're in an early stage startup and help them kind of along that journey. But yeah, and if you buy the book and you like it, go and give it a nice quote on Amazon. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Likewise.